I always thought my family was normal, or at least as normal as any other. We lived in a cozy house nestled in a quiet neighborhood just outside Boston. It was the kind of place where each street corner held a childhood memory. I could point out the exact spot where I learned to ride my bike or where I had my first snowball fight. The neighbors waved when they saw you, and everyone knew each other's names. It felt safe, familiar, like a little bubble of predictability in an unpredictable world. My mom worked as a real estate agent, always dressed in professional clothes, her phone glued to her hand. My dad was an accountant, and though he worked long hours, I knew it was for us. He was the quiet, steady type. Never raised his voice, never lost his temper. Growing up, I was closer to Dad. Maybe it was because we both had the same dry sense of humor, or because he was the one who helped me with my homework, never getting frustrated no matter how many times I got something wrong. Mom, on the other hand, was a bit more unpredictable. Some days, she'd be the picture-perfect mom, sweet as pie, taking me shopping or baking cookies with me in the kitchen. But other days, she seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. There were times I'd catch her staring off into space, her face unreadable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something going on beneath the surface. What I didn't know back then was just how dark that something would turn out to be. It was a chilly November night, the kind where the cold seemed to seep through the walls no matter how high the heat was turned up. I was up late, studying for my finals, trying to cram as much information into my brain as possible. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of my dad's snores drifting down the hall from my parents' bedroom. My mom was in the living room, her eyes glued to her phone as usual. She spent so much time on that thing, scrolling endlessly, and I assumed she was just keeping up with her real estate clients or browsing social media. But that night, something felt different. There was this weird, uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, like when you walk into a room and can sense something's off, even if you can't quite put your finger on it. I tried to tell myself it was just stress from school. Finals always made me anxious. But then, I heard my mom's voice, low and hushed, like she didn't want anyone to hear. "Don't worry, he'll be asleep soon. Just come over," she whispered. I froze in the doorway. Who was she talking to? My dad was definitely asleep, and as far as I knew, my mom didn't have any close guy friends. Not that she'd ever mentioned, anyway. I crept a little closer, trying not to make any noise. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched her face light up with a mischievous smile, her expression too intimate for it to be an innocent conversation. A million thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe it was just a joke, or maybe she was talking to someone from work. But something about the way she spoke sent chills down my spine. I went back to my room, but I couldn't focus on studying anymore. That weird, nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But after what felt like hours, I heard the front door creak open and close softly. Someone had come inside. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had to find out what was happening. Slowly, I tiptoed out of my room and peeked around the corner into the living room. There, standing with my mom, was a man. They were talking quietly, their heads close together. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't matter. The way they looked at each other told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was palpable. I started paying closer attention to my mom's behavior, noticing little things I hadn't before. She'd sneak off at odd hours, always with some vague excuse. She'd come home late or take phone calls in the garage, her voice muffled but clearly secretive. Every time I saw her, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and confusion. I didn't know what to do or how to confront her. What if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head? But I wasn't wrong. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I was jolted awake by the sound of voices coming from my parents' room. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was urgent, serious. I crept out of bed and pressed my ear against their bedroom door, straining to hear. My mom's voice came through, hushed but clear. "You just need to keep him asleep," she said. "Make sure he doesn't wake up. We can't have him finding out." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some fling. Whatever they were planning, it was bigger than that. They were plotting something dangerous. I had to do something, but I felt paralyzed. How could I confront my mom about this? And what would I even say to my dad? The next morning, while my mom was out showing a house, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I searched the house, going through her purse, rummaging through the junk drawer in the kitchen, even checking the laundry room. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted her phone sitting on the counter. She'd left it behind for the first time in forever. My hand shook as I picked it up and typed in the password, my birth date. The phone unlocked, and I scrolled through her texts, my heart racing. Most of the messages were harmless. Chats with clients, reminders, the usual mom stuff. But then, I saw a name I didn't recognize, Mark. My stomach dropped. I tapped on the thread, and my worst fears were confirmed. "Can't wait for tonight. I'll make sure he's knocked out," one message read. Another said, "We have to do it soon," while he's still clueless. As I scrolled through the conversation, I felt sick to my stomach. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to harm my dad. There were messages about slipping something into his drink, making sure he was completely out for the night. My hand shook as I took pictures of the text on my own phone, then put my mom's phone back where I found it. I had proof, but I didn't know what to do with it. The thought of confronting my mom terrified me. What if she denied everything? Or worse, what if she got violent? And how could I even begin to explain all of this to my dad? That evening, after dinner, when my mom went out to run errands, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my dad. We sat at the kitchen table, the TV playing softly in the background. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to find the right words. "Dad, can I talk to you about something serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked up from his plate, concern etched across his face. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The late-night visits, the secretive phone calls, the texts I'd found. When I showed him the pictures, his face fell. I could see the disbelief, the hurt, the anger all mixing together. He sat there in stunned silence for what felt like forever. "Why would she do this?" he whispered, almost to himself. "I don't understand." Neither did I. We agreed not to confront her right away. My dad said he'd call a lawyer the next day. We talked about going to the police. But without knowing exactly what my mom and Mark were planning, we didn't want to tip them off too soon. The next few days felt like walking on eggshells. Every time I saw my mom, my stomach churned with a mix of fear and disgust. It was like I didn't even know her anymore. Then one night, it all came crashing down. I was lying in bed, pretending to sleep, when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The door to my parents' room creaked open, and I strained to hear. My mom's voice, low and urgent, whispered into the darkness. The dose was strong, so much so that I had no idea what it was meant for. But deep down, I knew that whatever they were planning, I was out of time. This was my only chance to act. It was now or never. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone, the anxiety twisting in my chest as I quietly slipped out through the back door. My hands were trembling, shaking so hard that I could barely type, but I managed to dial 911. My voice came out in panic bursts, spilling everything to the dispatcher. "Please, you have to hurry," I pleaded, my words tumbling over each other. "They're planning something tonight. Something bad." The minutes that followed were a blur of panic and fear. Before I could even process it, police cars surrounded the house, their red and blue lights casting eerie, flashing shadows against the walls. I stood in the yard, frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of me. Tears streamed down my face as I watched the officers take Mom away in handcuffs. She was shouting at them, insisting over and over that there had been a mistake. But I knew better. The truth had already unraveled. Watching her being led toward the police car felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. A strange numbness settled over me, disconnecting me from everything that was happening. It didn't feel like my life anymore. Inside the house, I could hear officers talking to Dad, but I couldn't bear to go back in there. The weight of what I had overheard, the horrifying reality of what could have happened if I hadn't called for help, was too much to carry. Eventually, they called me inside. They separated Dad and me, asking us to go over everything. Every detail of what I had heard, every suspicious text, every late-night conversation I had witnessed. It was so surreal, like I was walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A part of me was terrified that they wouldn't believe me, that they'd think I was making it all up. But when I handed them my phone, showing them the text between Mom and Mark, I saw the detective's face change. Skepticism turned into something darker, an understanding of the seriousness of what they were seeing. This wasn't just a kid's wild imagination. It was real, and it was dangerous. A few days later, more details emerged. The truth was even worse than I had imagined. Mark wasn't some random guy Mom had met recently. He was a former client of hers, someone who had fallen into deep financial trouble. Their affair had begun about a year ago, but things had quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. The texts I found were only the surface. The police uncovered deeper, more elaborate plans, schemes that would make it look like Dad had died in his sleep from a medical accident. It was a twisted way for Mom and Mark to be together and to cash in on Dad's life insurance policy. The trial was a nightmare. Walking into the courtroom every day felt like a wound being reopened, again and again. Mom sat there, dressed in her lawyer's suit, looking so composed, so calm. She played the part of the perfect wife, the victim of some misunderstanding. But when the evidence was laid out, there was no denying the truth. The text messages, the hidden financial dealings, the testimony from people who had seen her with Mark, it all painted a picture of a woman I no longer recognized. Dad sat beside me every day, his face pale and gaunt, as if he had aged years overnight. He looked more fragile than I had ever seen him, and I hated her for what she had done. I hated her for shattering our family, for tearing apart the life we had built. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a part of me still loved her. That was the hardest part to accept, that I couldn't just turn off my feelings, no matter how much I wanted to. The day I had to testify was the worst of all. I stood in front of the entire courtroom, my voice shaky, my hands trembling as I recounted every painful detail. Mom sat there, watching me, her expression unreadable. Her eyes held a mixture of anger and sadness, and I couldn't tell if she was furious that I had turned her in or if she was just devastated that she had been caught. I couldn't meet her gaze. I couldn't bear to look into the eyes of the woman who had betrayed us all. It didn't take long for the jury to reach their verdict. Guilty. The sentence that followed was severe, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also overwhelming sorrow. Mom was going to prison, but it didn't fix what was broken. It didn't erase the pain, the betrayal. Our family was destroyed, and nothing could change that. I hadn't lost my mother to death, but to something far more confusing. I lost her to her choices, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to forgive her for that. In the months that followed, Dad and I tried to find some sense of normalcy. We moved to a new house, on the other side of town, far away from the memories that haunted us. It wasn't a fresh start, but it was something, at least a step away from the past. Dad began seeing a therapist, and I started counseling at school. Talking to someone about everything helped, even if only a little. The anger, the confusion, the hurt, it was still there, but I was learning how to live with it. Then one day, out of nowhere, a letter arrived from Mom. It had been months since the trial, and I hadn't heard a word from her. My heart raced as I opened the envelope, not sure if I was ready to hear whatever she had to say. The letter was filled with apologies, explanations, excuses. She claimed that she never really intended to go through with it, that she had gotten caught up in something she couldn't escape. She wrote about how much she still loved Dad and me, and how she hoped that one day I could find it in my heart to forgive her. But the words rang hollow. They couldn't erase the damage. They couldn't undo the betrayal. I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive her, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let what happened define me. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away, out of sight, but not completely out of mind. There was still a long road ahead for Dad and me, but I knew we were stronger than what she had tried to do. We were survivors. The wound she left might never fully heal, but I wouldn't let it control the rest of my life. Mom made her choices, and I made mine. In the end, it was my decision to speak up, to act, that saved us. And I would never regret that.